Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maria Kopczewska-Tam. I'm the current president of the Societas Linguistica Europea, and this will be the first evening lecture for this period. And we are happy to welcome our colleagues Leena Kolehmainen, Philipp Krämer, and Ulrike Vogl from different universities, so Helsinki, Brussel, and Gent. And they will be talking about their project Closing and Opening Doors. And the idea for this evening lecture came from a message we received from our colleagues at the University of Cardiff, at Cardiff University. They wanted us to help to make a statement against the budget cuts of language and linguistic studies that they were confronted with. And we know that there are budget cuts at many universities in Europe, and not only in Europe. So our original idea was to make such a statement with the input from the members of the Societas Linguistica Europea. So we put a call in the spring newsletter and asked colleagues to provide some information about such budget cuts. But no one responded to that, unfortunately. So we just went forward because we knew about the projects that our colleagues had been pursuing, and we thought that it could be a very good idea to have this lecture and then to think about what we could do in the future. So welcome. And the idea is that Leena and Philipp and Ulrike will give this presentation for about 45 minutes. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions and comments. And you can ask questions by chat, or you can raise your hand. And I will try to monitor this as well as I can do. And of course, I see that most of the people have switched off their microphones. So please do this if you haven't done this. Okay, thank you and welcome, Leena and Philipp and Ulrike.
Many thanks, Maria. Many thanks, Anne, for inviting us. And thank you all for coming to listen to our presentation. I will start today, and then Philipp and Ulrike will do the second and third part of our presentation. And it would indeed be nice if you could have your cameras on so that I know that I have an audience and that I'm not having a monologue here in my apartment in Helsinki. So if you just can, it would be nice. And I try to share the slides with you. Okay, I hope you can see it now. Okay, so we are going to tell you indeed today about our rather new project, which we have labeled as Doors. This is a collaboration between our three universities, and this is a project in which we are interested in current developments in the language education policy in higher education in Europe. And I hope that you can now see the second slide. Good, cool. So this slide illustrates you the topic of our research project. You see here newspaper and other headlines in different languages, in Finnish, German, French, Dutch, and English. And all headlines refer to the closure of university language training programs at different universities in Europe. And in our Doors project, we aim to investigate these processes, these developments. And today I'm going to give you some background information about our project. Then Philipp in the middle will share some very preliminary quantitative results we have so far. And then in the final part, Ulrike will show you examples from our data and tell you about the initial qualitative findings. And we have tried to reserve time for discussion and questions in the final part, and we also have questions ourselves to use, so the final part can be then interactive. So this is an ongoing project. We started collecting data last year in December, and now this autumn we have started to analyze the data. And the main focus are the closures and discontinuations of language training programs that have happened recently in Europe or are going to take place are planned to take place in the next years in close future. So we want to describe these processes, we want to understand these developments, we want to know where they are happening and why, which languages are affected here, how widespread this phenomenon is, and how these closures impact diversity in language education in Europe. So the initial starting point of this project were the closures, what we were worried about, closures that we had heard about and closures that we ourselves had experienced in our own careers. But fortunately, the opposite is also happening. So new language training programs have been also launched in Europe. So this is the reason why we are asking also about this opposite side in our questionnaire about new openings in language training in Europe. But today we are going to mainly focus on this negative side, on the closures and discontinuations, because this is the part of data we have now started analyzing. So why is this important? We all can, of course, come up with different viewpoints. The green box on this slide tries to highlight and give you some examples of the significance of university language training, and I am sure that each one of you can come up with new points, further points that could be added to this list. So the closing of language training programs has severe effects for students, researchers, staff members, professors. It has effects for societies and for international collaboration. However, in our project, we are approaching these processes and developments from another perspective, from the perspective of language making. And this is a new umbrella term that we proposed a couple of years in a special issue dedicated to this new concept. And in this special issue, we defined language making as a term that refers to different processes in which linguistic entities are conceptualized and constructed. So language making covers different processes in which linguistic production, speech, writing, signing is perceived as a language, as a dialect, or as another variety. So we are here dealing with processes in which boundaries between languages or dialects or other varieties are defined or redefined. And language making refers also to the naming, labeling, and grouping of languages and varieties. Names, labels, and groupings contribute to the bordering of linguistic units and to the creation of linguistic units. And these processes, language making processes, are always based on language ideologies and attitudes. So our views of different languages, how we conceptualize them, how we view them, the values that we attach to different languages, they all contribute to language making. And in our project, the key language makers, the key agents are, of course, now European universities. Their solutions, their closings and openings contribute to language making, to the value that we attach to different languages in Europe. So with the help of this concept, we sort of can narrow down our perspective. We can analyze the solutions of universities from different perspectives. We can approach the ideological background of these solutions, and we can describe the consequences for languages in Europe. So our online questionnaire was indeed published end of last year. The questions refer to the 2000s. So this is the period in Europe when the Bologna process started. And we are indeed limiting our perspective to Europe. This is the area we know best and whose history we ourselves know best. We have circulated this questionnaire through various channels, and we also would like to thank SLE for distributing the link to our questionnaire for us. The questionnaire has closed and open questions, and in these questions we ask the respondents to give us information about the closures that have been carried out or that are going to take place in near future, and about possible new openings. And so far we have received over 100 responses from 4 different universities, which are located in 14 European countries. And the questionnaire is still open. The QR code should lead to the questionnaire. So if you think that some important cases are missing in our data, please fill in our questionnaire and provide us with new data. And please feel free to forward the link, the QR code, to your colleagues if you think that somebody still has something to add to our data. So this is a mixed methods approach. The responses to the closed questions can be analyzed quantitatively. Our research assistant Zeki Bostan in Brussels has assisted us in processing this part of the data. And in Helsinki, our research assistant Alicja Kielpinska has been a great help in processing the answers to the open questions. And Alicja is familiar with the Atlas TI software, and she has used that software for the processing and coding of the data. Otherwise, we have so far used the critical discourse analysis approach in the analysis of the open questions or the answers to the open questions. And we have, for example, analyzed the reasons for the closures as reported by the respondents. And at this point, it's important to highlight that we are often dealing with meta-discourses. This means that we are not only analyzing individual persons' individual views. On the contrary, we have the feeling that the respondents often echo, report on, and recycle discourses. They repeat statements and use wordings that were, for example, used by the university administration when it justified the discontinuation of degree programs. And this means for us that our data actually opens a more general window into the universities, into the university administration and its discourses on languages, its views on languages. So we are not only dealing with individual persons' views and wordings here. Okay, and now I am giving the floor to my colleague Philipp Krämer, who is going to tell you about the quantitative results.
Thank you, Leena. So We did a preliminary analysis of the quantitative results from the survey that we have. And this first list or table that you see here is simply a list of all the languages that were mentioned by our respondents, exactly the way they were mentioned, and they were named by the participants themselves. So pretty much already the boundaries of linguistic entities as they were constructed or used to be constructed with teaching structures as such. And if you go through the list, you will see that we have a lot of individual languages, but also language groups or categories that were mentioned in the case reports. Almost all languages, national or official languages of Europe, are concerned somewhere. We also have some minority or regional languages. We have many also non-European languages that were concerned by the closures or discontinuations. Sometimes a whole language family or cluster was closed or reduced, specifically when a whole program or even a full department disappears. A few classical languages were also concerned, and we can also see already here that not even English is spared by these tendencies. So English doesn't necessarily benefit from the cuts and reductions and discontinuations in other language programs. If we look into the next list, the top 12 list, as it were, of languages that were most frequently mentioned for either reductions or full discontinuations of teaching offers. So the number of cases simply mean the number of universities from which it was reported that this language was concerned by either a discontinuation or a reduction. And German and Italian are the sad winners, as it were, of this tendency at the moment. So on the top of the list, we see some of the bigger national languages of Europe that are taught more frequently in universities all over Europe, so they can be concerned by cuts and discontinuations more easily, and a higher number of cuts are to be expected there, obviously. But we also see once again that even highly popular languages such as Spanish or even English are in this top list. And these are canonically or traditionally offered languages in the educational systems in Europe. But we can probably also see here changes in the societal position and the perspectives on these languages. And Ulrike will tell us a bit more about that from the qualitative data in a few minutes. As far as the programs themselves are concerned, we differentiated between reductions and discontinuations, and in terms of the numbers of programs that were concerned. So a reduction would be, for instance, a downgrading from a main subject to a minor, or an integration as an elective into another program, whereas then a discontinuation means that a degree program has disappeared altogether from the offer at this particular university. Methodologically, of course, it is always difficult to determine what one program is exactly, how many individual languages are included, for instance, in one degree. There are a lot of differences between the academic systems from one country to the other. So these are general tendencies based on what the respondents themselves reported as either reductions or discontinuations. And as we can see from the list here that we do have a lot of reductions, but we have even more actual discontinuations, that offers are completely disappearing from what a university has in their program altogether. And the fifth category on the list, those are typically academic language centers that don't necessarily offer full programs or degrees. They have then individual languages that count as individual cases that are offered only in terms of language courses as such. Next to the programs, to the degrees, we also looked into staff and discontinuations of positions in language-related programs. So these are the reported numbers of cases for discontinued positions. Very often those concern positions that were not filled again after the previous holder of the position retired. We presume that from the number that we see here, that those are probably underreported compared to the actual programs, for instance, because people who are still active at the university and can tell about discontinuations of programs would be probably more prone to contribute to the questionnaire than, for instance, if a position slowly trickles away with the retirement of colleagues and so on. Again, the methodological problem here is, of course, that it is very difficult to compare types of positions between academic systems, and reductions of positions often take much more complex forms than what can be simply reported in a survey, for instance, specifically in terms of full-time employment positions that maybe go to part-time first and then are reattributed maybe to another unit and so on, and then somehow gradually fade away from the staff that usually was integrated in a particular program or department. Actual terminations seem to be a more frequent phenomenon lately, even for active staff members that are not necessarily close to retirement, and that's definitely something we will have to look into as we get maybe more reports on specific cases as such. If we look into the geographic spread of the program reductions and the staff reductions, so this map shows us where we got reports from. Each pin represents one university. So we've got data from 62 universities and in a total of 14 European countries. Mostly reports from Northern and Western Europe, so the Nordic countries, the Benelux region, the UK. This is probably, first of all, an effect of our own networks and our contacts. It might also be a sign of a political mindset that is particularly strong in these countries, a mindset that depicts humanities or languages as, in one way or another, unprofitable or dispensable, that favors STEM over humanities or more applied academic activities. This picture is most likely still very incomplete, and we'll get back to this in the end again to the invitation to report anything that is missing. And certainly, as far as Southern and Central and Eastern Europe is concerned, we are fairly certain that there's much more that we don't have in our data set yet at this point. We're also planning on publishing the map on our website soon, so you can always check back if what you know is already there or needs to be added. In terms of reasons that were given for the reductions and discontinuations, Ulrike will give us more information in a second on what this looks like. Most frequently, respondents mentioned financial constraints or a decline in student enrollment. Very often those two are, of course, linked. The same with changes in university policies that might focus on a different profile, on different disciplines or different areas of research and teaching, often again linked to political reorientations and also budgetary reasons, of course. Very briefly, a note on the opposite. So it is often said that when one door closes, another opens. The saying is not quite true in our data set. We have a total of 32 reported cases of new offers that were created in universities. Roughly half of those are completely new degree programs, and the other half are additions of offers into a program that already exists. For instance, new languages that were added to a degree that is already in the program of university. The number of newly created positions, a total of 15, is obviously very limited. Probably, again, the same methodological reservations as with the discontinuations. The dimensions, I think, even here between the 15 new posts and the 61 cut and discontinued posts is still very striking, as is also the number for opening. We see a very clear tendency to much more closings and discontinuations and reductions, as opposed to a few incidental openings at one university or the other. So we will return now to the more gloomy part of the topic with the reasons given for the closings. The openings, as you can see from this map, are spread across the same space, as it were, as we also had for the closings. And Ulrike will then give us a few more insights and details on the qualitative results, on the narratives, as it were, that we got from our respondents in the questionnaire.
Okay, thank you. I'll have to start with a warning. I went to a conference last week, and I came home with a cold, and I lost my voice on Monday. So I'll do my best to get through the next 10 to 15 minutes. The qualitative analysis is based on the open questions, as Leena already told you. And in these open questions, we asked the participants about impact, motivation, processes of closures of programs. And within these answers, we focus on how languages and language programs are represented. Because we think if we focus on this aspect, which is also closely linked to the language making background, then we will know how these, the way the languages are represented and the language programs will tell us more about how this is used to justify the discontinuation of the language programs. The first, in our material, one first way of representing languages, which was striking, was but not surprising actually, that languages refer to something small. More specifically, there are a few examples where small can actually be interpreted as small in number of speakers. That is that the respondents refer to the perceived demographic insignificance of a language. However, even in these cases, as you can see on this slide, the respondents often distance themselves from the claim that a certain language should be small by putting small in quotation marks. And in the second example, it's even, you could say that, it becomes clear that the size of the language is actually defined by the number of students enrolling in it. And this is the next way of representing small. This is so no surprise that there are numerous examples of respondents talking about small languages in terms of small student numbers. So small or low enrollment numbers. That's one of them, and the second one, low numbers of graduates. That's in the second example. So in the first example, it's about 2 or 3 students who enroll each year, and in the second example, it's about 13 students who graduate every year. And then in a few cases, there's also another way of calling them small. That's when languages are represented as small to lack of suitable staff. That's also something we find in the answers in our material. In the first example, this is related to a retirement of staff, which leaves the program with a staff shortage. And or as in the second example, due to the lack of properly qualified staff. So in this context, staff which doesn't have the habilitation, so is not a professor, which is then supposedly, so there are not a lot of qualified staff for the small languages. That's what it's implied, and that's the reason why they're small and dispensable. If we analyze this, what we see here is that we see a recontextualization of a basically demographic term or social linguistic term by moving it into a new domain, university management. And then small is redefined by shifting the underlying evaluation criteria. So we move from small, meaning few speakers, to small, meaning few students studying a language, or even not enough staff to teach the language. And this reframing is not purely descriptive, it justifies institutional decisions. So it produces a problem definition. Languages are too small, and therefore legitimizes specific actions, and these are then the discontinuation of the program. Then the second way of representing languages we found in our material quite frequently is that languages and language programs are represented as replaceable or interchangeable, mergeable. And in such a case, respondents frequently suggest or report that it is suggested by someone in the university that certain language programs will be or can be merged with other programs. So as in the first example, where the plan is explained that, if I understand correctly this answer, that Dutch and French will be merged into one program, and in the course of this merger, the Italian program will be discontinued. And in the second example, it's not entirely clear what the result of the merging will be. So, and even if languages will be part of these new streamlined PA and MA offerings. And as we can see on the next slide, the idea of streamlining is very positively framed, and it's contrasted with the idea of fragmentation. And in this case, the respondent reports that the rectorate of their university is irritated by a high number of small programs. But at the same time, you see that the respondent opposes this interpretation of small numbers as fragmentation and calls it enriching diversity instead. And as we can see on the next slide, overall, we see also strong counter discourse to this merging discourse. And in the answers, the respondents deplore the loss of autonomy or visibility of certain languages or language programs. For example, in the first citation, when Dutch is integrated into bigger Germanic or European studies, or in the second example, when all addressed is a kind of an entity called modern languages. And when we try to analyze this, then we see here that the respondents, they mobilize competing language ideologies. So for many of them, languages are discrete and historically constructed entities whose boundaries they want to see preserved. And also the research traditions should be preserved along the lines of language philologies, and which then would safeguard the intellectual autonomy and would also make sure that there's also a future generation of scholars in these old disciplines. On the next slide, I try to analyze this from the perspective of the processes of linguistic differentiation by Irvin and Gull. So we can say that when we can apply, for example, the process of erasure Irvin and Gull put forward, more specifically erasure of complexity, and so in this case, the institutional reduction or flattening of complexity mirrors also the discursive flattening. So the university constructs a category Asian, for example, Asian languages, that overrides the historically made distinctions in the university context. And also, we can apply to the processes we see here, Irvin and Gull's process of iconization and of fractal recursivity. We could say that the small units are reframed as fragmentation, as a term that iconizes them as disorderly and inefficient, and which then allows to legitimize the merging of the languages. and fractal recursivity, which basically is the projection of one opposition onto another level. We can see this here in our case, that the opposition between streamlined and fragmented from an organizational level is then mapped onto the linguistic landscape. And the same, sorry. So this is then mapped onto the linguistic landscape, and it's also framed as something negative, so that complexity is always bad and order is good. So I now come to the third way of representing languages and language programs in our material, and that's this way I would call languages as misfits. In these cases, respondents report that language programs are described as outdated or irrelevant in the current era. So in the second example, we see it in the context of Brexit, where the idea is that if the UK doesn't want any foreigners to come into its country, then why should they need languages or need to learn languages? And in the first example, it's more of a critical note on the sole focus of traditional big languages, while adapting to current needs, in also, for example, in times of crisis, would also be advisable. Related to this, on the next slide, is that the depiction of languages as luxury in times of budget cuts that universities are affected by. So, for example, you see in the first example that this is also presented as inevitable through the use of the word constraints. So the financial constraints. So it's inevitable that there's no room for the luxury of the language programs. And also more generally, in the second example, spending money on a program that attracts only few students is not worth it for universities. However, as we can see on the next slide, there's also a counter discourse in this case, when respondents, in contrast, frame the closures as detrimental and leading to the loss or even the death of subjects, so languages as subjects. In the first example of Slavic languages, and in the second example of German. And if we analyze this, we can say overall that respondents mobilize a misfit discourse that constructs languages as out of alignment with dominant political and economic regimes. And languages are iconized as outdated, for example, in times of Brexit, or economically unproductive within a neoliberal university model. And through these framings, languages become legitimate targets for restructuring and discontinuation. And they also allow the marginalization of languages to feel common sense. Opposing voices, there are opposing voices, and they counter this by invoking the metaphors of loss and language death in this context, but also re-embedding the languages in a more humanistic value regime opposed to the neoliberal regime. Now, back to the claim we made at the beginning, or the framework Leena introduced in the beginning, that we start from the perspective of universities as language makers. As we see it, universities have always been powerful language makers. In the 19th century, they created, or actors within the university created, national philologies that turned languages into these tidy academic packages linked to nation states that we have gotten used to through the centuries. And today, universities are again making languages according to us, but now through the language of scarcity. So programs are labeled small and strategic. And the framing is used to justify the downsizing and the closure. And you can say that the managerial ideas about efficiency and orderliness, they get mapped onto the programs that are offered. However, there are inside universities, there are voices pushing back, but it's not clear entirely how to actually challenge this dominant discourse by the universities. And we said that we would finish up with questions, and there are 3 questions to start with on the next slide. And that is that we find actually a lot of or some counter discourses in our material, but the question arises how we can build on these emerging counter discourses. So first question would be, how do we counter the idea that small languages are luxuries we simply can't afford? How do we shift the framing from cost to contribution? A second question we see as important is, how do we resist the narrative that diversity equals fragmentation, and that in a university context, and that the solution is to reorganize languages into neat administrative clusters that are in no way related to the linguistic realities. And then the third question related to the misfit narrative. So how do we challenge this misfit narrative? That is the idea that languages don't matter in a time of crisis, when in fact crises make multilingual expertise more and not less essential. And of course, these questions don't have easy answers, but they are, according to us, central if you want to understand and also eventually challenge how universities today continue to act as these language-making institutions. And and finally, the invitation to complete our material, our data, by filling in the questionnaire if you have new information you haven't filled it yet. And of course, the general offer for all questions and remarks, which are very welcome to us, and I made it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. This was very thought-provoking and a little bit depressing. So are there any questions or comments? There's a question from Björn Wiemer on whether we can get a copy of the presentation. Yes, it is doable. All right, and this lecture is also being recorded, so there will be a YouTube possibility to listen to this for those who are absent today. Okay, so what about this question that you asked? Do you want people to comment on this, or is it just for the future, for food for thought?
Either way, practical comments, of course, questions about how we collected the data, suggestions, but of course also, food for thought. That's a good term for it, of course. But if you have any additions to this, nuances to it, everything is welcome.
Okay, so any other questions? So Björn, is your hand still valid? Björn
Yes,
Wiemer.
it is valid. I just raised it.
Okay.
Yes, it's out of the top of my head now when you ask. I think one of the problems when universities refer to the drop of student numbers, especially on these humanities and whatever affects the study of language in our domain, I think one reason is certainly the influence by all sorts of artificial intelligence. Because I often heard the argument that why do we need to learn languages? Everything can be translated by ChatGPT or something like that. And I think the problem is that we as a linguist have to make understand that first, for us, language is not a medium, but it's the object of study. And that by this studying the object, regardless of whether this is a big language or a small language in terms of speaker numbers, is an important domain in order to get insights into, well, all sorts of things. You do not need even speak about culture because this is very vague. You can refer to the cognitive insights. You can refer to anything else. And then second point, and I will stop, that artificial intelligence and whatever you can do with for translation or so is not useful for studying exactly these small languages because you cannot train any software of this kind. And then the second point is that what I wanted to say is yes, that when you study language, you cannot just add material given from artificial intelligence to what has been produced by natural speakers. So yes, and all this looks something like it's sorry for this analogy. It looks a little bit like producing for everybody McDonald's food, which is cheap and not healthy, and to monoculturize it, and they do the same for language now. I do not know, of course, how to bring this to the heads of people who take decisions about budgets and etc. But I think this is the kernel of the problem. So for the general public, or for those who might study anything at universities or care for their education, we have to make clear that language is an object of study and that it cannot be replaced by any artificial so-called intelligence because it is not creative. Thank you.
Put the people in charge on a diet for 3 or 4 months, which only consists of hamburgers.
Yeah, and only consists of ChatGPT produced English discourse, maybe.
Okay, anyone, do you want to comment on this, Leena and Ulrike and Philipp, or we just go further?
We agree. We agree.
You agree. Okay, right.
Maybe just a small point on the AI point, because that's something that comes back very frequently, even though, of course, our study covers a much longer period, also back when at least ChatGPT wasn't an issue yet, but I think it ties in with a much broader picture and serves as a new point to the more general discourse that doesn't value linguistic expertise as something worth paying for. So linguistic expertise should be available simply for free and to a cheap price, which is also reflected in the wages for language professionals and so on. So this is obviously a new dimension of a much larger, I think, way of looking at language.
Okay, thanks. Livia, before we... I have a little question. Sign languages have not been mentioned in your report. Did you get any data on them?
To my knowledge, we didn't. From the list that we have, I don't think we had any reports on sign language programs. They would be included if we had them, obviously, yes.
Yeah, there are not so many to start with, but I think that, for instance, in Sweden, I think that Stockholm University now is the only place where you can teach sign language. Before that, there were other places as well. So this can be something to add to your list. Okay, Livia.
Well, just to comment on this sign language fact, in Italy, for instance, sign languages are normally taught in psychology department, so not in humanities. This might be, of course, a problem in the sense that you don't reach the psychology departments in order to get data on that. But I don't want I didn't want to comment on this, but on the fact that that I think the problem is bigger in the sense that, in general, my impression is that humanities are felt to be too diverse, and they want to, and people leading the university and the governments want to reduce the diversity, and especially those who are in the big sciences, physics, mathematics, look at us with a rather with a rather with a sense of suspiciousness, because they think that we are too diverse, and in this sense we require too much staff and too much support for our diversity. This concerns not only the diversity of languages, but more in general. Archaeology, which is different from ancient history, which is different from classics, which is different from literature, etc., etc., etc. And they really want to reduce the number of diversity within the humanities. I say this because I'm sitting in a national committee in Italy for the evaluation of scientific journals, and in fact, this is what they object to us. Well, from the governance of these national agencies, this is what they object to us, that we are too diverse. They want to have a smaller number of disciplines of scientific sections within the humanities, and in this sense, I think linguistics and languages might benefit from the alliance with the other humanities which are also under attack for being too diverse. And in this sense, we should try to expand our point, and also to find linking to other disciplines which are also under attack. As I said, I mean, in general, literature and history of art, history, philosophy too, etc., etc. And this is a very important point, at least at the national level, to find this kind of alliance at the political level. Otherwise, we are too diverse and too small, also for forming a big movement able to address the issue of humanities under attack. And this was my point, actually. What do you think?
A question for everyone, or?
General, I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think it is a problem of languages in itself because of AI or whatever? But I really think that this is a general point concerning the humanities, that we are too diverse. And this is not good if you come from the perspective of an economist or a physicist or a mathematician or whatever, because they feel to be more homogeneous, and we are too diverse, and we require too much budget for our diversity, which is not affordable. And in this sense, this is a problem for organizing the plans for the development of the university, of the education in general.
Well, at least for Finland, I can only agree. So this seems to be going on in Finland too. But I'm unfortunately only closely familiar with languages, so I don't know the details for the other subjects. But there have been some processes where subjects have been merged, and bigger units have been built, and maybe even before us. But how many archaeologists does Finland need in the first place? So how many hundreds of thousands should they be then educated? So we maybe need 10 good ones, not hundreds of them. And this means that the size of the program should be sort of measured also from this perspective, not only from the funding perspective, that we should sort of fit in the same financial model than medicine or some other bigger subjects.
I don't know about the discursive part of it, but in Belgium there's now a growing division from the policy level between the humanities and the other subjects. For example, by taking away the fiscal advantages of the humanities departments, for example, when employing doctoral students. So this is a bad sign that indeed it's a bigger picture. It's more than the languages. Yeah.
Yes, Nigel.
Yeah, I guess my question is sort of related to that, in the sense that, going back to the figures that there were at the beginning about the lists of languages that were being lost. And at first sight, to me at least, it was surprising to see English there. And then I thought it's important to make a distinction, for example, because the issue of Cardiff was one of the places that was mentioned. The issue arises of losing the language in the country of the language. So the attack on English in English universities is very much of the kind of thing that Livio's talking about. it's people thinking you don't need to spend your time on literature and cultural issues and so on. Whereas the reasons for closing, say, the recent issues at Nottingham or Aberdeen or whatever, of closing what in English are often called modern languages, French, Italian, German, whatever, are rather different. And so I wonder whether in general in the figures one ought to distinguish between moves to close departments that revolve around the principal native language or languages of a particular country and attempting to remove the teaching of languages that are from outside in order to increase multilingualism and cultural interactivity, the kind of thing that all of us who've been involved in teaching languages in our lives have felt was the justification for teaching things other than our own inverted comma language.
This was a direct question, right?
Yeah, it was a direct question
To
about
Leena and
whether
Philipp
the
and
figures need
Ulrike.
to be broken down a bit to distinguish the two types of circumstance.
Yeah, well, this is a question, of course, first of all, of the qualitative data, what is reported in the individual case. It's also a question of methodology in terms of quantitative data and how to categorize those, which sometimes may not be as straightforward as it seems in the sense of what is actually the dominant or national or official language of the place where we are. I mean, judging from or talking from a Brussels perspective, these categories are very fluid in a sense. But of course, the general discourse that we are talking about, targeting humanities, targeting languages, and so on, they take an individual shape then in the local context, either targeting the official language with a set of arguments that ties in with the bigger picture of humanities not being valuable enough, or they are directed towards a language that is supposed to be situated outside the society and so on. But the broader surrounding arguments, of course, on a more general level, remain very much similar. And then they are sort of applied and adapted to the context as needed, as it were, as a justification.
But I was also thinking that, I mean, the proportion of the places in the country where they teach a particular language, this should be taken into consideration, and the geographic distance. I mean, if you have a tiny country and it takes half an hour from one university to another university, perhaps you don't have to teach a relatively small language at both places. I mean, this is the same argument you can apply to other disciplines, I mean, music or whatever. So I don't know if you take this into consideration, but I think this is an important thing. Okay, Damien Hall has raised his hand.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Maria. So I want to first of all say thank you very much to Björn for the point about the usefulness of what we call, as Nigel said, modern languages in the AI world, because that partly answers the question I actually put my hand up to ask, which is, what can those of us who are in possibly imminent danger of having our departments cut down or cut out, how can we use this stuff? What can we do to contribute to it? That all of that sort of question. For example, is it planned to publish any of this data in a way that we could use it with our hierarchical superiors, or what? How will this fit in beyond just us contributing to the questionnaire?
Yeah, Leena, go ahead.
We have, of course, planned to publish something on this, but after this talk, we thought that we still might get new data, so to fill in gaps, and then some things are going to be certainly published through our internet pages. So this is, so Philipp already promised that our map will be available there, so that you can check whether there are gaps in our data. But the most powerful thing I think was the qualitative analysis that Ulrike presented. So these arguments and counter arguments and these discourses which seem to normalize, and this is a dangerous thing. So at least in Finland, I could identify very many familiar voices there in these discussions, and they seem to get daily more and more normal, so that these arguments can be then used when the university administration needs to save money again. So this is how things sort of seem to develop. But of course, publications, but they take, of course, very much time. Publishing is a very slowly process, and for this reason, we thought that it might be valuable that we already put something online through our web pages.
When I said publish, I literally meant that make public. So yeah, on the website is absolutely great for me as far as I'm concerned. To get that data, would you have to be a member of SLE? Because I'm not yet.
It's necessary.
And this talk is, of course, will be then available too.
Sure. Great. Thank you very much.
You can pay a very modest fee and join the association.
Thank you.
But I think we have to finish now. Thank you very much. But I wanted to ask, do you think SLE can do anything with this? So, I mean, it's the biggest linguistic association in Europe, right?
Yes. I mean, one of the plans that we have is, of course, also go public in the sense of press and target, press outlets in various countries that we are present in, and of course, the SLE would be the ideal structure to spread this across the various European countries. Knowing also that there is a risk, which Leena already identified, that of course universities very often refer to other European countries and the general tendency to justify that what they are doing is the normal thing to do because it happens elsewhere. So we need to sort of have a built-in argument against this as well when we communicate broadly about the observations that we have.
Personally, as the person who's just brought up this about what we can do about losing our jobs, I think it would be very useful if SLE made representation when we know that there's a threat to a certain university, for example, Nottingham, in the UK recently. If SLE were to write to the people making the decision to cut modern languages at Nottingham and say, do not do this for reasons X, Y, and Z that we've talked about today, I think that would be very powerful.
That was the suggestion from the Cardiff University, that we would write something. And we had some discussions, and we're not quite sure about that, because sort of, should we keep writing letters to all the universities, one by one, and asking them to keep their languages and the jobs, or should we do something else? And that's why we wanted to first to have the survey from the members, and as I said, no one reacted. But then having this evening lectures just to have people who have worked on this presenting their research. So I think that we have to think more about that. What can be done? Yes.
Can I just back up what Damien said? Because I think my experience of letter writing, and I've been writing letters to universities when languages have been proposed to be cut for probably 20 years. And it can make a lot of difference. I mean, in Britain, it was the Philological Society that wrote a set of letters to all the institutions, from the president of the Philological Society, which in a way is a kind of national equivalent of the SLE. And if you get enough of those with enough prestige behind the authors of the letters, they do make a difference.
And the sort of counterpoint, the danger, is that if you only do things that aren't directly targeted at the people making those decisions, they just won't see them, or they won't take any notice. But if you write them a personal letter, they must read it.
Okay, so lots of good points and food for thought. Björn, And this would be the last
Yeah,
comment.
sorry, but I only wanted to add something which you call maybe in German a Schnapsidee. I don't know whether it is a Schnapsidee, but maybe it would be worth trying to get into relevant talk shows in our countries. Because linguistics is not represented anywhere. It is in terra incognita for pupils coming from schools, and we are doing our teaching from the scratch. So nobody has any imagination about what is linguistics about and why it is necessary. So if there would be a chance to just bring this not to university authorities, it would be okay as well and necessary, but also to the even more to the broader public, to people who just, well, do not have any imagination and do not understand that unhumbly linguistics is a fundamental science. And why?
Okay, good. I mean, we have now, Olivia has left, but we have been talking about having a special person for outreach in the executive committee of the SLE, and there have been various initiatives directed towards school and popularization of linguistics and showing that linguistics makes a difference, and it makes a difference. So I think that it's a good point, yes. Okay, thank you very much to everyone who has been here, and especially to Leena and Philipp and Ulrike for this great presentation. And as I said, food for thought.
Tack
Thank you
så
for the
mycket.
invitation.
Tack.